All right, it looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Sean Michael Mitchell, and we are going to be talking about EVs. So this segment's going to be Tesla owners talking about upcoming EVs, what's already hitting the market, what's coming to the market, what that's going to mean for consumers, what our takes on these cars are, and what those might mean for you as a Tesla owner. Sean, go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about you, what you do, and your All Things EV Tesla or All Things EV YouTube channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eli. I really appreciate you reaching out and looking forward to chatting here. The short version of what I do, I get this question a lot. Well, my day job is not creating YouTube videos. Contrary to some people's opinion, my day job is residential real estate here in Denver. So I help people buy and sell houses. On the side, and this has become more and more of a bigger thing, the more followers I have. But I started a YouTube channel where I started posting my Tesla experience of ownership, and that sort of evolved into a larger and larger following. Got invited to events, started creating more and more content, and that then led me down the road this last year, late last year, after attending the Rivian event, to broaden the content that I cover on the channel or from Tesla to all EVs. And it's really interesting to me to see what is going on in the market and how quickly things are changing. So the YouTube channel have a website where I'm posting that content as well this year. And I haven't even actually announced this on YouTube yet. But for the last 7-8 weeks, I've been doing an audio only podcast for platforms like iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and so on, where I cover news and commentary, go a little bit more in depth about my opinion about what's happening with the market. So that's the short version of what I do. I guess I also head up the Denver Tesla Club here in town, where we have about 1,000 official and unofficial members, a part of the club. And so my job is to make sure that everyone has a good experience of ownership and make sure that everyone's interests are represented here in the Denver and Front Range area.
Awesome. Yeah, you do a lot of great stuff for the Tesla community and the electric car community as a whole. So I think it's a great segue before we jump into talking about the electric vehicles that are coming to market. What made you decide to transition your channel from Tesla only to all things EV?
Yeah, it's, so like I said, after attending that Rivian event, I really got bullish on the idea of talking about what other companies were and are doing. Rivian is one of those companies that makes me really excited about the future of the EV industry. Before Rivian, you had Tesla and you had Nissan Leaf and you had Chevy Bolt for all electric options. After seeing Rivian's products, it really got me excited because they were really the first ones to come out with a production prototype that was competitive range-wise with what Tesla was doing. Now you're starting to see some other companies like Audi and their E-Tron, you have Porsche and their Taycan, you have Mercedes and their EQC. These are big automakers that are putting a lot of billions of dollars into these electric platforms and electrifying their current platforms. So, the state of the industry is really changing quickly, and especially here in 2019, we're going to have some what I would say are viable alternative options outside of Tesla. Now, we can get into this a little bit later in terms of how competitive their offerings are, but nonetheless, we have options. And I think the threshold that automakers need to make sure they get above is 200 miles of range. So that's like bare minimum. If you want to be competitive, 200 miles of range. There are some other things as well that we can talk about later, but it's exciting to see all of these automakers, many automakers, talk about electrification of their older platforms and new platforms.
So you know what, let's talk about that. So one of the things that we're looking at right now is we've got two angles being taken at this electric vehicle problem. So we have these legacy auto manufacturers who are just electrifying their current models, and I've gotten to check out the e-tron. I know you have as well, which basically it feels just like the other Audis, except for if you lift up the hood, there's some indication that this is no longer an internal combustion engine, that this is now a battery-powered car. But besides that, the rest of the experience feels very much like, what the gas-powered version of that car would, except for now it's electric. But now we also have these new players in the market. Now, Tesla has been doing this a decade, so they're not really a new player anymore. But we got up-and-comers like Burton and Rivian and a number of others that are now actually building entirely new platforms ground up as an EV. So what do you tell me? What do you think, Sean? What do you think the competitive advantages or disadvantages are going to be between these two subsets of like the legacy trying to electrify and the startups building electric from the ground up?
Yeah, you have some micro forces working against these traditional automakers. And what I mean by micro force or macro forces is what I mean. The macro forces are things like cultural politics inside of these long-standing companies. You have the mentality inside of these companies that's this is the way that we've always done things. Why do we need to change? This is the crux of innovation in any industry. You have companies that have a long-standing history of doing things one way, and I think that these automakers, traditional automakers, will have a really tough time breaking out of that mentality, the old school mentality that always happens when innovation settles in. We've always done things this way. Why change things that aren't broke initially? You see this sort of at play when you look, aesthetically and visually look at these EVs from traditional automakers. They very much look like their existing lineups, and a lot of that is intentional, right? Let's take the Audi E-Tron. It looks like an Audi SUV, and in some ways I like that a lot, because if you're a traditional Audi owner, you love the brand. It's your long-standing go-to brand. It's not going to aesthetically be a difficult thing to transition to, right? It looks very, the infotainment system, the layout of the interior is very, very similar, but the downside to that sort of aesthetic transition or lack of transition is you don't have the efficiency, the drag coefficient, for example, of a Audi e-tron is nowhere close to what you have with the Model X and certainly the Model Y when it comes out. Same thing with the Jaguar I-Pace. It looks very similar, but the efficiency is just nowhere near as close to what Tesla is doing. And so you have some of these macro forces at play with these traditional automakers that if they don't push hard enough, if these the top leadership and executives at these traditional automakers don't push hard enough to challenge their employees to think outside of the box, it could end up preventing them from innovating enough to be competitive with new companies like Tesla, with new companies like Rivian, who don't have those old school political forces at play. They can build something from the ground up, from scratch, exactly the way that they want it to.
You highlighted something important there about, I think, the cultural baggage that these legacy automakers have, and that, I'm sure you saw the interview that Alex at E4Electric did with Sandy Monroe, and one of his predictions was that the legacy automakers are going to take a long time to get it right, because there's going to be a lot of bodies that are going to have to move out of these companies and bring in fresh mindsets. And then if you also look at the historic arc that, at least that I've seen these legacy automakers take, they were a leading force behind fighting this EV movement for a long time. And I can't say it's a surprise that the same people who were leading the charge in some of the propaganda campaigns to convince people that EVs were not a good idea, it's not a surprise at all to me that now that the market's changed and they have to adapt, that maybe these people aren't going to adapt. So, I think it's going to take some significant leadership change, which probably won't happen until these companies start seriously losing money, because that's the way these things happen. Humans are typically reactive. Legacy companies typically act reactive. So I think we have some time to come, and I think there's some more, punches in the face, so to speak, from the market before they're going to truly get on board with this. And so you also highlighted something about the Jaguar I-Pace and the E-Tron that definitely struck me when I check it out. As somebody who's a Tesla owner, as somebody who's experienced a Tesla, those cars are all a step down. I would never consider spending that kind of money on those cars when I could have the Tesla experience instead. That being said, though, if you are going to be somebody who's just been buying Audis all the time and buying gas cars, the fact that you can step into a car that is basically the same experience and just happens to be electric, I think you will get a lot of people to just stumble into EVs accidentally, and that's a really good thing. As soon as you get over to the electric vehicle movement, as soon as you get on this side of that fence, it's over. You're never going back. So whatever it takes to get more people there, as much as me as a consumer wouldn't buy that, my favorite upcoming EV aside from Tesla is Byton. I absolutely love that Byton is going all in, all the chips on the table on this futuristic self-driving car. Like, they're going to deliver a car that's level 4 from the gate. They've got all this incredible, it's about the passenger experience. And like, I love what they're doing with that. So that's the type of car that's made for me. But I think there's a huge need in the market for what Audi and Jaguar are doing for now. I think the question for me is just going to be, do they evolve into create something innovative once people are tired of that? Once there's 10 million Model 3s in the world and people have seen that, oh my God, this $35,000 car has some cooler things than my $100,000 E-Tron does. Once that word is out, Audi and all these other automakers better have something innovative ready in the wing. So we'll find out what happens. But
yeah, this is a perfect parallel to what we saw in the late 2000s with feature phones or flip phones and smartphones. You had this very, very fast transition to smartphones that had an all-glass screen in which was fully touch and no buttons. And the people who you found struggling with that transition were people who did not grow up with technology, and they didn't embrace it as quickly. And for companies that held on to that old way of doing things, i.e. BlackBerry, i.e. Nokia, they didn't move as quickly. And so you saw companies that didn't have a old school mentality like Apple and like Google and all of the companies that use Google software, Android software, jump in and grab the market share because people realized that they preferred the smartphone in the functionality of it, because you instantly had more capabilities. And once you got past the transition of going from a feature phone to a smartphone, you actually realized that your life was better with the smartphone. And it's the same thing here with internal combustion engine cars and electric cars. Once you transition into the electric vehicle, aside from the audible feedback of a gasoline vehicle, there's really not much that you miss. Your life is better. You have less maintenance to do with the car. You have far better performance, far better handling. You have the ability for these cars to be updated and refreshed on a week-by-week basis. You have access to the car from your phone. So I think that, to your point, when some of these traditional people are open and willing to embrace the electric vehicle, I think they'll find that it's a far better experience. And for those that don't, they're just going to get left behind. Both consumers as well as automakers, those that are slow to adopt this new platform will die and go away. And unfortunately, there's a very high likelihood that some of these traditional American automakers and some Japanese automakers will die because they failed to innovate quick enough.
And that's one of the amazing things about free markets and innovation, that it's a lot of people take this angle that like, oh, it's sad to see this company of 100 years fall by the wayside. But I have the complete opposite approach. If any of these companies go away as a result of failing to progress, and somebody who's progressing won, that's what we want. That's a win for us. And I think there's definitely going to be some American automakers. Like, I'm going to be very interested to see what Ford's long-term viability is once you add the Tesla truck, once you add Rivian, some of these other vehicles coming up. But do you have a prediction? Do you have an idea of who you think which automakers are going to be the first to not make it out of this?
Chrysler is probably the furthest behind, and then Ford. GM has been the most vocal about transitioning to electric. So I think that GM I have the most hope for, but Chrysler, Fiat, Ford, they're in trouble, and probably more, maybe equally in trouble. Toyota is in deep trouble. They have been in bed with hydrogen for many, many years, and they don't have anything to show for it. And they're still living off of the legacy, quote unquote, electric platform, their hybrid, the Prius, for over a decade now. And it just is old technology, and it's limited technology. So, I'm most optimistic about European automakers. They by law they're being forced to work on their electric platforms by the governments. So the government is sort of forcing the hand on this issue. But here in America, I think you're going to see Chrysler and Ford have a really hard time. I know that they're thinking about it, but at this point, they may be so far behind that, I mean, when you compare what Tesla has to, there's no viable products above 200 miles besides the Chevy Bolt. And really, that's not even a fantastic car in terms of software and in terms of design. Ford, what does Ford have to show for it? They don't have much to show. And Chrysler, I can't think of anything besides the.
I think Chrysler only has 3 cars. Somebody showed that to me recently. Like, their total models is very diminished. Go on.
Yeah. I mean, there's that really tiny one, the Fiat 500, E500 or something like that. It's real tiny vehicle. But aside from that, I can't think of any fully electric vehicles that Chrysler Fiat is selling. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I certainly don't know of it, and it's certainly not above 200 miles.
And real quick, just to give some people context who didn't follow what Toyota's been doing the last decade. So basically, Toyota bet on the wrong horse. Early on, when government funding started coming out to back clean energy vehicles, Toyota went very heavily all in on hydrogen. And over the last several years, it's become incredibly apparent that the hydrogen thing isn't going to work, and unfortunately was never going to work, not in this world. And that even Elon Musk has called them out for it a number of times. And I tell you what, I love their honesty, because when he's done it, they've even responded and said, like, he said, yeah, this is inefficient. Electric is way better. Here's all the loss of energy through every step in the chain before it gets to your vehicle. And Toyota even responded with a public statement and basically said, you're right, Elon. Just like, it's been unbelievable. There's been a couple other interactions where he's kind of called it out too, and they've completely agreed with his criticism of it. And I think it's one of those things that there's been a lot of dollars, and there's still dollars that are funded to that, right? Even in California, when they make these initiatives with 10-year horizons, there's still money that's going to be spent. So like, there's still funding, and I think there's still enough momentum in that company to do something with this. But it's almost laughable. Like, I saw a commercial they ran for the hydrogen car, and I'm like, do you think people are worried about electric vehicle charging stations? How about hydrogen fuel cell stations? Like, remember the last time you saw an app that said, here's where to find you? Here's a hydrogen, what is it? The hydrogen trip planner? Maybe someday on Mars. I don't see that happening. So I got one for you. If you were to buy another EV that wasn't a Tesla, if you were, second EV, whatever, which one would you buy right now and why?
That's really tough.
And by the way, the ones that are still in production, that's on the table because there's not many out there. So based on what you know of everything out there.
Yeah. So based on what I know right now, and this is a big gamble since I haven't seen it in person, but I have the most hope for, and I'm most excited about, the Porsche Taycan. I'm excited about their performance specs. The range of the battery seems to be, above most. So I think that one has the most promise. But again, I haven't seen it in person. So
and they're changing. And from what I've seen, the original prototype design they showed us is not looking like what it's actually going to be, which was to my disappointment. I don't know what you felt about the change, but
yeah, the concept, the proof of concept was far better looking. They really tamed it down. In fact, I was thinking about that last night, looking at some new photos of it. They really went conservative with that, and I'm a little bit disappointed because I thought that the original concept design looked a lot. This is the way that it is right now is a very, very safe play for them. So whatever. I mean, but in terms of vehicles that I've seen, probably the Rivian. I just have mixed feelings about their stadium headlights. I really don't like them. It's not a design approach that I'm not crazy about it. I know that it will probably be the signature Rivian look with those vertical headlights, but personally, I don't like it.
So one last topic to cover before we end the live stream, and I think this is going to be an important piece of the future of EVs. Let's talk about charging and charging networks. So Tesla has this massive global supercharging network already with V2 superchargers that can charge up to 120 kilowatts. They've just began running out their 250 kilowatt V3 superchargers. And the importance about these is not only are these superchargers 250 kilowatts, but Tesla Model 3s are actually going to be able to charge up to 250 kilowatts. And they're going to make improvements to the V2 superchargers. That's going to bring us Model S and X owners up to 145, 150-ish kilowatts of power for charging. So let's talk about how this is going to relate to the other manufacturers and the other manufacturers who don't have high-speed charging networks. How's that going to play into this, and how do you think that's going to affect consumers' choice, right? Because you may want to buy this car, but they're going to face the same things that Tesla did of people walking into the showroom and saying, yeah, but what if I want to take a road trip?
Yeah, there's, I think there's a couple of things to cover on this point. One is, if you're someone who's watching this video and you're considering an electric vehicle, consider the type of driving that you do. Most people's driving, 90 to 95% of people's driving is around the city. And therefore, most people's charging takes place at their home. If you have a garage, it's in your garage or, at your house. So I think that's a really important thing to realize. With that said, there is this psychological ceiling when it comes to infrastructure, because people are used to seeing physical gas stations, and there is this sort of safety blanket with a charging infrastructure. And though when you drive an EV, most of your charging, 90 to 95%, takes place at your house overnight while you sleep, there is this safety blanket, even with EV owners, and I see this all the time in the comments of my videos, where people say, oh, I can't buy this EV because it doesn't have a charging network. So, that I think is important to put out there. There definitely is this sort of this mental safety blanket. A lot of it is sort of unwarranted until you need to take a long road trip. So good segue here to my road trip that I just took last week to the Model Y event. So I drove from Denver to Los Angeles, and it took me about 21 hours or so. If I was in another vehicle, let's say a Chevy Bolt that has equal range to my car, a full charge will get me on my 75 kilowatt hour Model S about 245 miles at a full charge. The range of the Bolt is about 238 or something like that miles. It would be next to impossible to make that trip in the Chevy Bolt in the time that I did with my Tesla. So, though most charging needs are covered for by at-home overnight charging, when you do need to go on a long road trip, that's when it becomes this almost impossible feat to be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time. So I think that Tesla, the Tesla building out their charging network is turning into a extreme competitive advantage. Not only just because it is this sort of psychological advantage, just to know that it's there at any point you can go and do a fast charge, but for these long trips, Tesla car vehicles are really the only vehicles that can do it in a reasonable amount of time. Now, if you're watching this and you know the industry well, you're probably thinking, well, what about Electrify America, and what about all these other companies that are doing DC fast charging? Yes, this is true, but it's nowhere near as dense as what Tesla has right now. So they have a serious leg up, and it's only going to be getting better because
let me jump in there on that.
Supercharging.
It's interesting the way the coverage has been of Electrify America is the way it's talked about. It makes it seem like, oh, don't worry about it, guys. Electrify America is going to have a supercharging network twice the size of Tesla's in like 5 minutes. And in reality, there's only a handful of these things out there so far. And it's going to take billions of dollars and years to even come close to a network like exists right now with Tesla. And that's because Tesla has spent billions of dollars and years building it. So I think we need to, I think that's the part that I find most intriguing and that's most interesting to me about these legacy manufacturers that have jumped into this EV game. I still get the sense that they're really not that committed because none of them have committed to building supercharging, right? Like Porsche is kind of forcing their dealers to put them at their, just their showrooms. And, if I got a Taycan and I want to take a road trip, it certainly is not going to be from dealership to dealership so I can supercharge.
Yeah, I think VW is in the best position, right? Because they here in the US, they've been forced to install these Electrify America stations. So, their subsidiaries, Porsche and Audi and VW, are going to benefit from that the most. That being said, I don't necessarily believe at this very moment, it could change in the future, but I don't believe that an automaker has to build their own charging infrastructure. If they're not committed to that, they definitely, the alternative needs to be that they need to be investing hundreds of millions of dollars into some of these third-party charging companies. So they need to say, hey, well, in exchange for, $500 million, we're going to take, 30 or 40% ownership of your company because we believe that this charging infrastructure thing is a significant advantage, competitive advantage for Tesla, and we need to do something about it. So that may not have been the case for gasoline vehicles, right? However long ago, 100 years ago, some companies like Chevron decided to create this infrastructure, and then now you have this sort of expectation that third parties will be the supplier of the fuel. I expect because of Tesla that mentality will probably have to change. And in order for these legacy automakers to be competitive, in order for someone to even consider an electric vehicle, these automakers will either have to own their own charging infrastructure or invest significantly in these third-party companies that are building out their fast charging network.
I think that's probably the best solution, especially since they're latecomers to the game. Because if any of these legacy automakers were to start today on building their own network, they'd be buying from square one. I think you're absolutely right. I think they're going to be in a much better place to either invest heavily in and acquire a significant equity stake in, and or straight up acquire one of these electric charging companies and make that the solution for their business. Make that the network for their cars. And it also gives them competitive advantages to do things like, hey, on this giant Ionity, for example, charging network, if you own a Porsche, you get a cheaper charging rate. You know what I mean? Like it creates exactly what you're saying. It creates so many secondary ways that these automakers can benefit from that investment that, like, I think I'd be surprised, and now that you've said it, I'd be surprised if we don't see an acquisition like that in the next couple of years. Now, if you're a legacy automaker and you're watching this, the sooner you make one of those acquisitions, the better, because the cheaper it's going to be for you to acquire a stake in these companies. The electric vehicle movement, it's already left the station. This is happening. So the sooner that these automakers acquire somebody who's making early moves and making quick moves, a more competitive advantage they're going to have against the other people who haven't yet caught up. So before we shut this down, Sean, any last thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I would say, and I intend on doing a video about this. The more time that I spend looking at these companies creating electric vehicles, there's two fundamentals that keep bubbling up in my mind. And as I cover these other car makers or automakers doing electric vehicles, two fundamental pillars to success in the EV market. One of them is having this 200-mile or above range threshold. If you want to be competitive in the EV market, you have to be above 200 miles of range. Simple. You're dead on arrival if you're producing a vehicle that is under 200 miles of range. The second pillar or fundamental in order to be competitive in the EV market is fast charging infrastructure. We're not talking about level 2, 30 miles of range an hour. We're talking about something that is competitive, 150 to 250 kilowatt charging, direct DC charging, in order to be competitive. If you don't have those two things, your vehicle is dead on arrival. So fortunately, a lot of these legacy automakers are coming out with DC fast charging, CCS fast charging. So that I'm confident on that the industry is moving that way. But the charging infrastructure is still the biggest competitive advantage outside of 200-mile range plus. So if you're an automaker or a consumer considering an electric vehicle, in my opinion, those are the two most important things. Does that vehicle have 200 plus miles of range? And two, do they have a charging infrastructure that they have control over in some ways? And that's why I said that VW is in the best position, because their hand is being forced to build out this Electrify America charging network. So that's sort of how I would summarize what the industry needs and what consumers need to look for when they're considering an electric vehicle.
You heard it here first. Well, thank you everybody who's joined us. Thank you to Sean Mitchell for coming on and doing this Tesla Owners Talk EVs live stream. To follow Sean has a YouTube channel. Sean, I believe your channel is still listed under your name. I just looked at YouTube here, but also it's Sean Mitchell's channel is All Things EV. So
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining, and we look forward to doing this again. I think Sean and I will definitely do a discussion again at some point. I've enjoyed this, Sean. It looks like you have too, and I think the audience will as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Take care, Sean.